They sent fake cops to my ranch threatening to arrest me over a few fence posts. But they didn't know I was the former attorney general, and I was ready to turn their world upside down. If you love jaw-dropping HOA drama, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more wild neighborhood sagas. Let's dive into this insane story. The sprawling acres of my ranch stretched out under the endless Texas sky, a haven of rolling hills and whispering grasses I'd carved out after decades in the cutthroat world of law. Retirement was supposed to be peaceful, a reward for years as the state's attorney general, where I'd tangled with corrupt officials and dismantled shady schemes. My ranch was my sanctuary, 50 acres of freedom, a sturdy ranch house, and a barn where my horses roamed. But peace, it seemed, was too much to ask for when the Willow Creek Homeowners Association came knocking. The HOA, a self-important gaggle of clipboard-wielding busybodies, governed the nearby gated community, a cluster of cookie-cutter mansions that had sprouted up a mile from my property line. My ranch predated their development by decades, and I wasn't part of their jurisdiction, but that didn't stop them from eyeing my land like vultures circling a carcass. It started with letters, polite at first, then increasingly curt, demanding I comply with their rules. My fence was too rustic. My barn's paint was unsightly. My horses' grazing was disruptive to the community aesthetic. I ignored them. My land wasn't theirs to control, and I'd checked the deeds. My property was exempt from their reach. But the HOA wasn't used to being ignored, and their president, a woman named Linda Grayson, was the kind of person who thrived on control. Linda was a retired real estate agent with a peroxide blonde bob and a smile that could curdle milk. She'd built her little empire on petty fines and neighborhood gossip, and my refusal to bend was a personal affront. The letters turned into visits. Linda would pull up in her gleaming SUV, her heels sinking into the dirt as she marched to my porch, waving violation notices like they were court orders. I'd politely send her packing, citing legal precedent and property lines. She'd huff, her face reddening, and storm off, but I could tell she was plotting. The HOA's complaints escalated, claims my fence was an inch too close to their boundary, that my irrigation ditch was somehow flooding their precious cul-de-sac. I had surveyors confirm my boundaries, and every inch was mine, but facts didn't matter to Linda. She wanted submission, and I wasn't giving it. One sweltering July afternoon, a pickup truck rolled up my gravel drive, kicking up dust. Two men stepped out dressed in dark uniforms that looked like police gear at a glance, badges glinting, radios crackling, holsters on their hips. But something was off. Their badges were flimsy, their uniforms ill-fitting, and their truck had no official markings. They introduced themselves as community enforcement officers sent by the HOA to address my non-compliance. My years as Attorney General had honed my instincts for fraud, and these two screamed fake. Their eyes darted nervously and their hands twitched too much for seasoned cops. I leaned against my porch railing, sizing them up. They demanded I remove my fence by sundown or face arrest. Arrest on my own land? My pulse quickened, not with fear but with the old thrill of catching someone in a lie. I asked for their credentials, their jurisdiction, their warrant. They stammered, offering vague references to HOA authority and community standards. I pressed harder, quoting statutes on impersonating an officer, a felony in Texas. Their bravado faltered, sweat beading on their foreheads. I pulled out my phone, dialed the county sheriff, a friend from my AG days, and described the situation. The officers exchanged glances, then bolted for their truck, peeling out before I could finish the call. The sheriff confirmed what I suspected. The HOA had hired private security goons, dressed them up as cops, and sent them to intimidate me. It was bold, stupid, and very illegal. I could have let it slide, but Linda had crossed a line. I spent the evening digging through public records, pulling up the HOA's bylaws, their financials, and Linda's history. What I found was a goldmine of dirt. Shady fines, questionable contracts, and whispers of embezzlement. Linda's little fiefdom was a house of cards, and I knew how to make it collapse. But I needed to play this smart. The HOA wasn't just Linda. It was a network of loyalists who'd back her no matter what. I needed evidence, leverage, and a plan to expose them without sinking to their level. The next morning I drove to the county clerk's office, pulling every document tied to Willow Creek. The HOA's overreach wasn't just about me. They'd been bullying other nearby landowners, especially older folks who didn't know their rights. I found complaints buried in county files, stories of fines for minor infractions, threats of liens, even forced sales. Linda's operation was a racket, and I was just the latest target. Back at the ranch, I noticed new signs along my property line. Bright orange notices claiming my land was under HOA review for eminent domain. Eminent domain? For a private HOA? It was laughable, but it showed how desperate Linda was getting. I photographed every sign, documented every letter, and started building a case. My old legal instincts kicked in, the same ones that had taken down corrupt officials and shady developers. This wasn't just about my ranch anymore. It was about stopping a tyrant in a pantsuit. By week's end, I'd drafted a cease and desist letter, citing Texas property law and the HOA's lack of jurisdiction. I sent it certified mail to Linda and the HOA board, knowing they'd ignore it. That was fine. I wanted them to dig their own grave. The fake cop stunt had been their first mistake. Underestimating me was their second. As the sun set over my ranch, casting long shadows across the fields, I sat on my porch, sipping coffee and plotting my next move. Linda thought she could bully me into submission, but she'd picked a fight with the wrong rancher. The battle was just beginning, and I had a few surprises in store. The HOA's response came faster than I expected, a certified letter stuffed with legal jargon and veiled threats. Linda's signature was scrawled at the bottom, her handwriting as aggressive as her tactics. The letter claimed my fence violated some obscure covenant, and if I didn't comply, the HOA would pursue all available remedies, including a lien on my property. It was a bluff, but a dangerous one. Liens could tie up my ranch in court for years, draining my savings even if I won. Linda was banking on me folding under the pressure, but she didn't know I'd faced worse than her in courtrooms across Texas. I spent days combing through the HOA's documents, cross-referencing their bylaws with state law. The deeper I dug, the uglier it got. The HOA had a history of strong-arming residents, especially those on the fringes of their community like me. They'd fined an elderly couple into bankruptcy over a garden shed, forced a widow to sell her home after slapping her with thousands in aesthetic violations, and strong-armed a farmer into giving up a strip of land for their community expansion. The pattern was clear. Linda used the HOA as a weapon to extort and control. My ranch, with its prime acreage and water rights, was her white whale. I wasn't just fighting for my land, I was fighting for everyone she'd bullied. My next step was to rally allies. I reached out to neighbors, folks I'd met at the feed store or church who'd grumbled about the HOA's overreach.
A retired teacher named Clara told me how Linda had fined her for planting wildflowers, calling them unkempt. A mechanic named Roy shared how the HOA tried to block his access road, claiming it lowered property values. These weren't just complaints, they were witnesses. I invited them to my ranch, where we pored over maps and deeds, piecing together the HOA's land grab. Clara brought old photos showing how the HOA had redrawn boundaries to encroach on neighboring properties, while Roy had kept every threatening letter they'd sent. Together, we had enough to expose Linda's schemes, but I needed to hit her where it hurt, her reputation. I contacted a local reporter, a sharp young woman named Emily, who'd covered my tenure as Attorney General. Over coffee, I laid out the evidence: fake cops, forged notices, predatory fines. Emily's eyes lit up. She smelled a story that could go viral. She agreed to dig into the HOA's finances and publish a piece, but only if I could get concrete proof of their fake cop stunt. That meant tracking down the security company they'd hired. Using my old contacts, I traced the pickup truck's license plate to a shady outfit called Titan Security, a firm known for skirting the law. Their website boasted community enforcement solutions, but their Yelp reviews told a different story: complaints of intimidation, unprofessional staff, and fake badges. I posed as a potential client, called their office, and got them to admit they'd sent officers to my ranch at Linda's request. I recorded the call, every word admissible in court. Armed with this, I filed a formal complaint with the county sheriff and the state's private security board, accusing Titan of impersonating law enforcement. The sheriff, still chuckling over the fake cop fiasco, promised to investigate. Meanwhile, Emily's article was taking shape, and whispers of the HOA's misdeeds were spreading. Linda, sensing trouble, doubled down. One morning, I woke to find surveyors on my land, planting stakes and claiming they were verifying boundaries for the HOA. I confronted them, citing my deed, and they scurried off, but not before I snapped photos of their equipment and company logo. It was another Titan security front, and I added it to my growing file. Then came the kicker. Linda filed a lawsuit against me, claiming my fence was on HOA land and demanding $50,000 in damages. It was a desperate move, and her lawyer, a slick out-of-towner with a cheap suit, had clearly underestimated the case. I countersued, alleging harassment, fraud, and abuse of process. My years as Attorney General gave me an edge. I knew how to bury them in paperwork and make every motion sting. The lawsuit was a gift. It gave me a platform to expose the HOA in court. As the legal battle heated up, I noticed subtle changes in Willow Creek. Residents started whispering at HOA meetings, questioning Linda's leadership. Clara and Roy spread the word, and soon a dozen homeowners were ready to testify against her. Emily's article dropped, a scathing exposé titled HOA Tyranny, How One Neighborhood Kingpin Bullied a Town. It went viral, racking up thousands of shares and angry comments. Linda's perfect facade was cracking, and I could feel the tide turning. But she wasn't done yet. Late one night, I spotted headlights creeping along my property line. Someone was tampering with my fence, trying to cut the wire. I grabbed my flashlight and a camera, ready to catch them in the act. The battle for my ranch was far from over, and Linda was about to learn just how far I'd go to protect what was mine. If this wild HOA saga had you hooked, smash that like button, subscribe, and share your own crazy neighbor stories in the comments. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where things get even crazier.